afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jennifer Bober, and I work in marketing and communications for Renew International. We're so happy to have you here with us today for the next of our Women in Conversation series with Genevieve Mougey from the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C., who I had the pleasure of meeting when we worked together on some webinars with Sister Helen Prejean, someone who you may be familiar with. As we get started, I do just want to, let's see if it's going to automatically start my music on me. Watch. Oh, there we go. Okay. I've learned. So anyway, the webinar is being recorded. So watch your email in a day or so, and we'll send you out a recording. And if you have questions, please use the Q&A box, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen, and send them there rather than the chat. It's a lot easier for me to just see one place, and we'll answer your questions as we get towards the end. And so without further ado, Genevieve, welcome.
Hi, how are you? Thank you.
It's so good to have you here with us. As I said, yeah, it was great to get to meet you and work with you as we're doing those webinars with Cardinal Gregory and Helen Prejean, which was
Wasn't that
great
incredible?
events.
Those were
just amazing.
Great conversations and just a great understanding of the applications of our Catholic faith. Yeah. Thank you.
And so, we before webinars and as we're in meetings, we got to chatting, and I thought, what a great person to have as part of this conversation. Someone who, works in a major metropolitan archdiocese, who has a real sense of her faith and found her voice within it. And so I always like to start these conversations by asking people to just tell us a little bit about their faith journey. What led you to, theology is not a hot topic for to study. And,
I think it is. I think it's an incredibly hot topic. And I find all kinds of places to talk about it, whether it's out to dinner, on a date, or at a bar, whatever. I have no problem talking about it.
And what led you to that?
Yeah, as I was kind of preparing for the conversation, it led me into some other places where I've done this kind of deeper reflection and thinking about it. And so I'm originally from the Great Plains of the United States, Nebraska, not the Midwest, it's farther west. And I remember when I think about my faith and how I understand Catholic social teaching, it always comes back to this one pivotal moment when I was 5 years old and my mom was taking me to the dentist. And on our way to the dentist, I'm old enough that was during the middle of the Ethiopian food famine and food crisis. And those images really struck me as a kindergartner when I would see them on the television. And we were walking into the dentist's office and I was going to have a little procedure done. And my mom just stopped me and she said, there's going to be some pain here, but I want you to just offer up that pain to the children that are hungry in Ethiopia, to the children that are really hurting. You offer that pain up. And I thought about that and I just burst into tears. And I could see my mom and she goes, "What is wrong?" And I said, "There are children starving and you want me to give them my pain?" And thus began the dramatics of my faith journey. No. So I think she took a moment to kind of talk about what does it mean to offer that up? What does it mean to have that connection about how we understand how God uses each one of us to step alongside one another and to accompany. And that thinking has kind of evolved, obviously, as I've gotten older. And but that's something that's just a pivotal point in my life that I reflect back on that moment outside of Dr. Creel's office in North Platte, Nebraska. And then, I wouldn't say it was the typical experience, but we prayed every night during Advent as a family. We did something with the Jesse tree symbols and that began as a young child for me and then continued on into high school years with our family. And it's just something that I continue to embrace as an adult. And then from there, just, finding different ways to see what matters to me and how I understand um, where God calls me to, and also what that looks like in a larger sense and how I participate. And I don't want to paint this picture of that it was just all puppy dogs and roses, because when I was 17, when I was just about ready to get confirmed, I walked into my parents' room and I said, great on you guys, this is great, but I'm not getting confirmed in a month. Go ahead and cancel the party. Go ahead and tell grandmother and grandpa not to come down because it ain't happening.
Wow.
And it led to we can call it a conversation now, but ultimately, like my dad said, it's great. Yeah, you live in this house. Your mother wants you confirmed. You will be confirmed. And I was. And so, good on him for having, the fortitude and the care for that. But the larger piece, I think, too, is that thus began a conversation. And I think I've alluded to this maybe when we were offline before, some of our engagements with, the Cardinal and with Sister Helen, where my parents, my dad sometimes doesn't agree with where I come to and how I understand church teachings on the death penalty or something to that effect. And when I lack something, I just come back with, well, I guess, we can look to you for this because you're the one that made me get confirmed, and you're the one that ensured that the Holy Spirit was confirmed on me. And here I am doing church work. So I thank you for that, Dad.
This sounds like me because I have an older brother, and he actually asked for a little sister. So whenever I drive him crazy, I'm like, well, you asked for a little sister. And he's like, I was 4. What did I know? So we've alluded to the fact that you work in the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. So what's that like? I mean, major metropolitan archdiocese, and wow.
Honestly, like it continues to kind of fit the narrative of like the faith journey, because I did a master's, I did my undergraduate, I went back and I did ministry in Nebraska for 6 years. And then I figured I should probably go on and get the degree that goes with these jobs that I'm getting. So I went on and did a master's at St. John's in Collegeville, Minnesota, and then took a job that brought me out to Washington, D.C. after I graduated. And so I've been out here since 2009. And the work has always been fulfilling and challenging and enlivening, and just a continual reminder that, one, I'm not back west. I'm not, I'm not in the Diocese of Grand Island where I grew up, and there are, just different customs and different ways that we engage with one another. And so it's an incredible archdiocese to be working in. There are so many people, but what's incredible to think about as far as what's the same is, obviously the idea that it's the same liturgy, it's the same faith, it's the same practices that we know and that we understand that move us and compel us to share our gospel values. And the people fundamentally are the same as well. It's, good people who want to do what God calls them to say yes, and to embrace what it means to be in community with one another. It just looks a little different as far as, it's not cornfields around me here. There's a lot of, city sidewalks. There's a lot in that kind of landscape that's different.
And that's, I think one of the great gifts of our faith is that, wherever you go to mass, and I've like literally gone where it wasn't in the same language, but
Right.
you're mentally going through the liturgy in your head. And I remember being in, of all things, at a Ukrainian church, and when they got it was here in the United States, but when they got to Shvante, 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 I knew where I was. I'm like,
Right.
holy, 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 there we are. And that's the great unifier of our faith. People forget that Catholic means universal.
I had the
And
same experience in Mexico. I was at Tepeyac and was there on a pilgrimage with some college students when I was working in Nebraska. And just it's a foundational experience. We hear about it, but until you can actually like step inside that experience and step inside what that means to have a universal understanding, it it changes the scope. I think, at
yeah,
least for me, it did. It changes the scope of how I understood what universality meant, because I studied
yeah.
it, but I didn't have an application for it.
Right. It's one thing to know it with your head. It's another thing to feel it in your heart. And
And that's the thing about Catholicism that I think is so cool too, is that it's a sensory faith,
yeah,
right? Like, know it in your head, feel it in your heart, smell it, the incense. And some people like incense and some people don't, but when you're walking into a church, whether it's a Catholic church or not, because it still smells like
yeah,
incense regardless. Um, and just the sensating understanding of what it means to participate together and the universality of that, I think, is
yeah,
pretty cool.
it is.
Yeah.
So we're talking, just as we got started now, you're going to be transitioning from
Yeah.
your role,
Yeah.
and making choices. And, what led you to where you're going to be headed?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as far as, I'll be leaving the Archdiocese on April 1st and moving back west, and in some ways, just moving back home. And it's like so many things. I remember when I was in undergrad, my campus ministry director reminded me, and it's something I carried with me, that our Catholic faith is not like, it's not a moment, right? Like, we were never saved in a moment. It's a continual journey. And this, I think, fits that narrative and understanding for me, in that in 2019, I was with one of my colleagues who is just an incredible friend and woman of faith with me, and one of my best friends. And we sit on a national board together, and we were on our way out west, and we decided to just do some national parks and to go on this little vacation before we ended up at our national meeting in Salt Lake. And so we did this whole thing, and I just had this, I mean, I don't know if it's like a Paul on the road and getting knocked off the horse Damascus kind of journey, but I was out in a prairie, and I don't know if you've ever been in Nebraska, but there's a lot of prairie in Nebraska.
Yeah.
Um, we were out on a prairie grassland, and I just had this incredible moment and clarity of just come back. And I got in the car and I didn't say anything to my friend. And this is something that we would normally just talk about, and like, because we can get there together, like we can get that deep. And I just sat on it. And I think it was probably like the next day that I tried to talk about it, and I just burst into tears, because the reality is that I've enjoyed every aspect of my life in the DC area, in the metro area. And I bought a house, and that was a huge, like, to buy a house was incredible for me. And I was like, I think I gotta figure out how I'm going to come back. Like, this was never in my card. Like, you could have laid any kind of game board out in front of me, and I would have been like, no, never. And here it is. So I came back from that trip and kind of understood that this was going to be kind of this slow, gradual process. And that's what it's been, is kind of this slow, gradual process of just accompaniment. The Holy Spirit certainly journeying with me in all of this, trusting a lot in all of this. Because I'm certainly open to understanding my vocation and seeing where that leads and how that is fulfilling to me. But moving back west and not necessarily having, a job lined up, but knowing that this is, for whatever reason, me answering a call is challenging in some ways, challenging for my faith,
Absolutely.
challenging for how I understand how I'm, as a single woman, am supposed to provide for myself. So, but I also think back to, like, we have so many incredible stories in our 2000 plus year faith tradition about
Yeah.
people who said yes to scary, challenging things. And
The amazing things that God does with that.
amen.
You
I am
know,
not
and
God, and I don't pretend to be God. And I'm here to say yes, and I'm here to be a part of how I can lift up the story and the message of Jesus Christ. But yeah, there's
it's, and you say that, and it makes me think of, our, so how much of our faith
mm,
is predicated on a young woman who said yes to God.
well, I mean, all of it
I
really
mean,
was.
that's it. That's it.
Yeah,
And
I mean, that's
and it's amazing, your trust in God, but then, understanding God's trust in us,
mm,
which that,
isn't that an incredible way to see the complementary nature of how we're being called, but also how we answer that call.
yeah,
To see that this is a relationship, right? Like, we understand
yeah,
ourselves within community, we understand ourselves within relationship, and we obviously look to the Trinity to facilitate that full understanding. But that we get to participate in this, I think
yeah.
is core and elemental and pretty cool.
Yeah. One of the things that we'll often say is, God has no hands in the world but ours.
Right.
And that's something, so, one of the things that we do at Renew is really, seeking out that element and helping people bring their faith into their life. And what roles do you see for women in, you've done so much work in social justice, so what roles do you see for women in that space in our church and social justice?
I mean, quite frankly, like, outside of, and I want to be careful how I say this, like, every role, certainly, right? Like,
Yeah,
we're called to participate in the life of the church, and I think we do that in very real and fundamental ways. And people who are much more brilliant are certainly working on very specific questions that I'm not going to get into here. But as far as the work of social justice, which we understand from a Catholic framework of looking at systemic issues and how we can change them in society. So specifically for me, that's, we could look at housing, we could look at immigration, we could certainly look at the death penalty, which is what we did, on those webinars with Sister Helen and Cardinal Gregory. I think that what's encouraging for me to see young women and people coming up in the faith, they're challenging so many of the presumptions and the presuppositions that maybe even I held on to, that it was like, that's just not even worth, I already know that that's not how they're going to deal with this housing thing, the federal budget, blah, 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 blah. And I get challenged and they're like, no, that's not an acceptable answer, because this is not what's just for people. This is not how God calls us to live and engage with people. And so I think it's such a unique thing to look at how, in particular, I think women have a role to play in that conversation, and not to just play, but to lead it. Right. And I think that there's so many good examples of women leading the work. And all you have to do, and this is where it sounds like I'm on a commercial, the Catholic Campaign for Human Development, the Catholic Bishop's social justice work in the United States is such a critical and foundational piece of how we get to participate in that language. So taking up the collection in your diocese supports that work. Making sure that you have CCHD funded groups in your diocese supports that work, because it's specifically looking at the women and the people who are impacted by the lack of justice, coming up and saying, this is what I need. This is what my community needs, what my family needs, what my children need. And I'm not going to have somebody else tell me how that should be accomplished. I am my own agent and I get to participate in this work. And I'd like you to come alongside it.
That's such a I love that respect.
Oh,
And
right.
that, and that's something that people, it's like, I want to help. Well, the first thing that you can do to help is listen.
Amen.
And we forget that sometimes, I think. And
Especially as an
so,
extrovert, I forget to listen, right? That's,
yes.
and that's, I think, I mean, we could even do it like there'd be a whole thing about the synod and how we could, engage in the listening of the synod, and what Pope Francis is inviting each and every one of us to do in that moment. There's a really phenomenal quote, and I'm awful for remembering quotes. But Lila Watson is an Aboriginal Australian activist. And let me see if I can make sure I get this right. She's attributed with saying, if you have come to save me, then you basically need to just go ahead and be removed from this. But if you have come because your liberation is tied to mine, if your liberation is bound to mine, then let's work together. And I think that's, the fact that, obviously we have an Indigenous, woman activist, specifically naming that kind of work in such an intentional way. I think that that's an incredible way for each of us to think about how we want to frame what it means to be community, to support the work of subsidiarity, a Catholic social teaching principle, and how that then leads us into the work of solidarity. Just fundamentally, when we understand that we are all participating together, we understand solidarity.
Oh, beautiful. So this leads right into my next question. This whole
Almost
women
like
in
it's a plan.
conversation, it's all about bringing women together to tell their
Mm.
stories and, to talk about their faith. And, you know, how important do you think it is for women to support each other in their faith journeys? And who are some of the women who've influenced you?
This is this is hysterical, because some of them are on this call. This is what we do when we support one another. Um, my confirmation sponsor, the woman who didn't know that I had this like crisis of faith when I was 17, and she's known me my whole life. Mrs. McGann, Marilyn is, I think, here. My mom is here. When we first had this conversation, I thought, this is a way that I can talk about who and how they mean something to me. I get to see these women, when I would go home or when I'd be with my parents, or different kinds of things. But it's just these little ways that I can share, like, you mean something to me, like the relationship, the friendship, the the attention that you imparted on me as a child, as I grew, as a teenager, into young adulthood, womanhood, like that meant something. And regardless of like whether or not I was doing this work or anything, like that's an attribution and a reflection of how I understand how women support one another. And my mom did a great job of modeling that, I think, in our family. And my father did too, as far as just how he came alongside my mom and supported her in her relationships. He's much more introverted than either myself or my mom is a little introverted too, but he certainly is you know, quieter. But he formed his own significant relationships and modeled for me what that relationship mentality can look like. And then, there are just people in my life, friends I've made along the way who, are able to listen and to hear. And I think that women have such a unique opportunity to show love.
Yeah.
And not to say that men don't do that. Like I'm not trying to get into a dichotomy here.
Right.
There's just a way that we can show up for one another that I think society allows women to express differently. And I think that should be acknowledged. I'm probably much more comfortable telling my female friends that I love them than my brother is probably to his male friends. And I want to honor what that freedom is for me, that I get to say that, and I get to have really healthy relationships, and relationships that, hold accountability and hold trust and hold deep affection. Because I think that that's really unique, and really just foundational.
Yeah.
And there was an experience where one of my mom's friends was dealing with some health issues, and she's been, a significant part of my life as well, in that story. And I knew if I told my siblings, like, we need to show up in this moment, like we need to do this. So I went ahead and just, ordered some flowers and sent them on and signed it, the Mougey kids, because that's kind of what we do. Like,
yeah,
we're an all for one kind of a gang kind of a thing. We very rarely ever do that kind of stuff independently. But each of my siblings, came back and were like, yep, absolutely, here you go, blah, blah, blah. And just knowing that we're all there for that relationship that my mom has with that woman that's specific, but we've also enjoyed the benefits of it because she showed up for each one of us in very unique and very particular ways as well. And that's also what it means to be community,
Yeah. Yeah. And I know for myself, it's like, some of the things and different things within our faith, that domestic church and women are so often, they're really at the center of domestic church. And I think of things like, my family's Polish, Easter's coming up, and I'll be making the babka, and I'll be and doing all these things, and I can't help but, as I'm, sit there making that dough, that, this connects me to my mom, this connects me to my grandmother and my babka Jezielewicz and babka Bober. And yeah, it's
pierogi. We do pierogi. And this even ties to even the larger connection too. For the longest time, I was under the assumption that I too was Polish. And it wasn't. We're Ukrainian. And so having kind of the world situation and the eyes on Ukraine has in the last, certainly since we discovered, that my great grandparents immigrated from Ukraine, it's kind of changed the way that I'm feeling about certain things, obviously, right now. But like pierogi, borscht, I've never craved borscht more in my life. Like borscht. I need.
Yeah.
Where's my beef? Come on. And even again, like going back into that understanding of solidarity, like how am I showing up in the state of the world, and that it's this elemental driven understanding of connection points.
Yeah. And women are so good at those.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Aren't we? I know, like, one of the people that I've been following since this whole thing is a woman who is Ukrainian born and
Hard.
and yeah, no, this is great. Um, Genevieve's mom is popping up with some comments to us, which is lovely. We made her cry. Um, but she is very engaged in activism from a feminine perspective, and she has been telling her story since she fled Kiev, and
Yeah.
that whole idea that we were talking about with listening, her sister wasn't ready to go yet, and she said having to fight the urge to tell her sister what to do and listen to what her sister was saying and honor her feelings, balancing with her fear for her. It just, yeah.
I don't
And
know that I would know how to do that. Like I
yeah.
talk to my sisters daily. I don't
I
know how I would ever figure out that balance. What do
I
you mean?
don't either. I
No,
don't know
you're
how she did
listening with
that.
like no. My cousin actually was living in Kiev and they left 2 or 3 weeks before the invasion. And they're safe now and everything. And all that is to say, like I knew how I felt when it was my cousin, and she's one of my dearest cousins and friends. And it still feels, very disjointed. That was enough for me.
Yeah.
There's so much to the story, and there's so much to the human impact that I don't think we're ever going to be able to encounter or understand or unpack. And I don't know that it's mine to unpack, and I don't know whose it is, but other than what you just said, Jennifer, I think is key. Like, how do we sit back and listen and accompany in that? And I think that's going to be so foundational in the next 10, 20 years, and how incredible that we have been provided this incredible opportunity from Pope Francis to learn about how to listen in a synod.
Yeah.
And even the before document of that, like Fratelli Tutti, like on conversation, brotherly affection, how to sit and listen to one another from Fratelli Tutti and enter into dialogue, but then understand that a huge part of dialogue is that we sit and that we listen and we take in, and that is probably the bigger work is the listening.
Yeah. And and that's one of the things I love with doing small groups and having something like women in conversation, where you sit and you listen, and working with the groups that I do, it's like I'm always cognizant. It's like, okay, let's make sure that everybody gets heard.
Yeah.
And but the thing is that you can see as the people you know join in these kind of conversations that they learn it, and then they can model it, and it's in I very much drop that pebble and push those ripples out. And I think that women we're going to be dealing with this and pushing those ripples out and trying to make those connections.
And I think that there's thought, or I think that there's an impression, at least in society, that because if you're listening, it means that you're not participating or you don't have anything to contribute, or that you don't necessarily need to build on anything. And I think for me, one of the foundational bits of learning in that is that I don't have to comment on everything. That doesn't mean that I don't have something to contribute, because anyone who ever has spent any amount of time with me knows that I have an opinion about just about everything. But that takes work, and that takes emotional energy to sit back and listen and to figure out how can I participate in finding a solution here? Am I required to find a solution, or am I required or being asked to accompany in a way that ensures that the other person who I'm listening to has agency to find their own solution? And is it more important that I support their agency in finding that solution?
Yeah, sometimes a lot of people, they want to be the knight in shining armor coming into the rescue, and no,
We don't need that. We don't
we
need
don't
that.
need that. Stand
Yeah.
next to me. Stand next to me.
Right.
Be with me in it.
Yes.
And
And I think we've seen that in a lot of the different social movements that, we could look to even for examples of what that means. And there are just, phenomenal examples of what it means to stand alongside, but not co-opt the microphone or to think that I have more to say than a person who's experienced something firsthand. And I think that's something that people, particularly in social justice work, have really been exploring with deep intentionality. I'd say specifically in the last 10 years, but certainly throughout the thread of conversation. But there's been a lot written about it in recent years that I think guides the current thinking about what it means to stand alongside a movement, not co-opt the narrative, but figure out what is the agency that I bring and how can I support the work? Because that's actually the goal, right? Is to get to the end result. How can I support that without overshadowing or taking over?
yeah, and important conversations. So the future, what do you what are your hopes and dreams for women in our church, the local church, the universal church? What future would you like to see for your science children? And for the those who come after us.
My science children's grandmother is on this call too, so she's pretty exciting. Yeah, so I was sharing with Jennifer that, another really dear cousin of mine, very close friend and just dear family member. They have two children and they left the church. And so how they refer to, normally these kids would have been my godchildren and I love and cherish them, but their parents don't believe in God and they believe in science. And so they refer to me as the science mother. So that's where that language comes from. I think for me, like the future, like I'm really living into Lent right now. I have to tell you, like Lent, the last 3 years, for whatever reason, has just been an incredible, like deep dive into desert work. And this year is just no different. The circumstances are maybe different and the larger scale initiatives or work of the world looks a little bit different. But I think Lent continues to be this place and a space of how am I preparing myself to make sure that I am my best self, not my perfect self, but my best self for Christ. And as I continue to say yes to that, then that means that I continue to say yes to the church. And I can't say yes to the church if I'm not showing up. So how do you do that in a pandemic? How do you do that in a place where things feel really fragile right now, where things feel very frail, where things are just strange? And I think
Uncertain.
Uncertain. For me, that answer is in prayer. And whether that is, praying with my friend that, we talk almost every day to pray together through our Lenten devotional. Or if it's just sending a text to any number of my friends and saying, hey, I really need some prayers, or what can I pray for you? That's just really a deliberate part of my ongoing language. It is making sure that when I'm praying, and that means praying for others and praying for myself and praying for intentions that I hold, but also recognizing people want to show up for me too. And am I being honest with them about that? Am I allowing them to be who I need them to be for me? And so am I requesting prayers from them? Am I requesting ongoing community and relationship with them.
And that's something women, we're the caregivers, and we take care of everybody else. And it's hard for us sometimes to ask for care or to even accept care. Yeah,
I will
I've
say
learned
I have.
that the hard way, and
Mhm.
you deal with a big illness, and I literally had one of my friends who like sat me down and said, "You will accept help,"
Yeah.
you know,
And that's
and
key.
yeah, and saying, to be accepting help
Mm.
is often a gift to the person who is helping you,
Mhm.
and don't turn away the gift.
Yeah. And I think that there's even a way to think about it even creatively, right? Like we always, my my schooling and the way that I do ministry, um, we had an instructor who talked about the pastoral imagination. So how creative am I being in how I'm one showing up for myself or showing up for others or allowing them to show up for me? How is it as simple as going on a walk? Is it as simple as, just a quick call? Or I have one friend in particular that she recycles cards. Like, so somebody says like a really cheeky card and she'll cut the front cover off and then she'll repurpose it. And so she sent me two cards because I shared that I was going on this kind of big leap of faith and that I knew what I was going to need and I wanted her to accompany me on this. And so I have two cutoff cards from her came within days of each other, just saying like, I know I'm going to need you. I don't know how you're going to show up for me, but I know I'm going to need you and I just need to let you know. And so I think that, the creative engagement of that, and then, is what you named, like that takes some work to be able to be sat down and have someone tell you like, you're going to get help. And you're just going to have to figure out how to get okay with it because that doesn't always feel good, but that's
Yeah,
the reality.
yeah. And I love you talk about the little thing. I'm one of my all-time favorite saints is Therese of Lisieux,
Yeah.
and that whole idea of the little way. And I think women tend to be good at that. We get that it's not always doing the huge things. So we work at some of the huge things, and there are women who do amazing work, but sometimes it's that text message that pops up from my friend that's just a little heart that just says, "I'm thinking about you and I love you."
Yeah.
It's that card, it's the flowers, yeah, the
I have a
postcard.
friend who for years I would send her a text message on a specific day every day for years. Um, because we were marking a very specific point in her life together. And I wanted to make sure that I knew that she was going to be marking that date regardless, but I wanted to let her know that she wasn't alone in marking that,
Yeah,
that there was community, that there was prayer, that there was a sense of sisterhood, quite honestly,
yeah.
of women experiencing loss. Like that was there. That was a real part of that. And then, yeah, I think that that's a gift to be able to share that.
So we have had some questions pop up, and actually, our author for Urban Conversation, she loves your comment about Century Church, and women seem to be much more comfortable using our bodies and movement in prayer. How do you think we can, you know, serve the church with those kind of gifts?
I mean, I think you've said it. Like, I mean, so I always go back to, I grew up in a diocese where girls were altar servers, were acolytes. Um, and I remember the day that I was in third grade and my mom was like, all right, I signed you up. You're going to be a server. And I mean, that just wasn't cool. Nobody did that. Like, oh my gosh. You had to wear these white robes and they had a belt on them. And I was a pudgy kid. And that's the last thing I wanted to do. But there I was up on the altar serving. And, then you have these people who are my parents' age coming up afterwards saying, "Oh, great job." And it's like, meh. But that was the bodily experience of a young person, obviously. And it certainly formed how I understand my participation in the church. It requires active participation for me. I'm a lector at my parish. I am a Eucharistic minister at my parish. I am active. I am in it. It looks very movement oriented for me. I am active in this universal church and how I participate and where I find resonance with my vocation as it's lived out. So it has to be active. It has to be like a bodily participation. Like we're corporal beings, right? Like
Yeah,
why we have a corpus on our crosses, because we
right.
remember that it is so central and it's so tied to the human experience of who we are, what our faith calls us to. It's more than just a
Yeah.
symbol, right? It's active participation.
I know as a cantor that, I'm aware of, like when I'm, bringing people into sing, it's like, how are my hands moving? Is this gesture really feeling welcoming? And that sort of sense of movement as well. And just, it the liturgy is such a beautiful expression of movement,
Yeah.
and to be, participating in that. I mean, what a gift.
It's incredible. And I think one of the things that was so foundational to how I now think about liturgy and how I encounter liturgy was the active participation as a young person. And then my home diocese has this incredible program that high school students go on this week-long retreat. And it's changed over the years and it's evolved, and as it should, right? Nothing is static. But what continues to be central in it is Eucharist, is the liturgy, and understanding that in our own identity, like we continue to participate. But one of the unique facets of that was the high school students planned the liturgy. And for many of my peers, when I was going through this, it was the first time that they'd ever thought about, well, what do you mean that there are 3 readings? Oh, there's an Old Testament reading, there's a New Testament, and then there's a gospel, and there's a psalm. So it was like this really incredible catechetical moment, in addition to the actual understanding and larger application of what it means to be liturgy or Eucharist, and have that actually be the work of the people.
It's funny, when you are immersed in it, when you've written, the things that people don't know sometimes catch us off guard.
Sure.
They're
Right.
such a surprise sometimes.
And I think that, I mean, that's I think one of the common mistakes that we make as Catholics is, and certainly I, with the kind of the schooling and the studying that I've done, like it can get a little pretentious. It can get a little highfalutin. Like it's nothing like going to a family barbecue or a family picnic at a family gathering and like getting taken down a couple notches by one of your uncles, or um that being said, though, like it's the call. It's what it means to be family, to be community, to participate, and to understand that we work on this together.
Yeah. And I love these conversations. And please, people, if anyone, has any other questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A box. But I love these conversations because they get to be a further exploration of faith for me, as well as everyone else. And it's such a privilege to get to, sit and talk with people who are working in the church, have a voice in the church, and are passionate and committed to our faith. And that's a gift. It's a gift to see and to get to share that with everyone else. So I'm just looking to see if nothing else is popping up so far. Genevieve, thank you so much. This has just been a wonderful conversation, and I'm kind of disappointed that you're going to be moving. So wherever
I won't
you are,
be far away. Like maybe this is what, the gift of the pandemic is like we recognize like this media and this technology has been out for years, but did we ever really utilize it and understand all of the bandwidth that was there? And so again, like the universal nature of the church, we're all here. We're here together. So let's continue to find ways to support and lift one another up and be present.
Yeah, and we do. I know that we get signups from all over the place. Literally all over the world sometimes. Which there have been times I'm like, is it 3:00 in the morning your time? And someone's actually on the webinar, not just signed up for the recording, but actually on the webinar, and I'm always just blown away.
I did that on the flip end. I was presenting for a program in Australia in Melbourne a couple of weeks ago, actually. I was the one that was up at 3:00 in the morning. It's difficult. So when they show up, like they should be recognized.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, wow, I'm impressed. So let me just share screen for a moment here. And there we go. And just let everyone know, this conversation is part of our Women in Conversation. The name comes from a wonderful resource by Loretta Pahonic, who is on the webinar today. I know she's been watching, and she wrote this great resource for helping women come together and have these kind of wonderful, deep conversations and help them find their voice, help them find their place in the church. You can get more information at renewintl.org/women. And there is a promo code here that if you would like to get a copy of the book, you can use that promo code. And all of this will be sent out to you in an email. So if you don't have a pen and paper, don't worry. I will send this out to you, the link to the book and the promo code. So one last time, thank you so much, Genevieve. And I'm so grateful that you were part of this conversation. And
thrilled.
Someone's just thanking us and saying, looking forward to seeing where the Holy Spirit leads you. So am I.
Lovely. Thank you.
So
thank you for the opportunity to be here. It's been a pleasure to have worked with you over the last year with all of the work that you do for Renew. It's such a phenomenal organization. Thank you for that, Jennifer.
Thank you so much. And working with the Archdiocese and getting to have the conversations with Sister Helen Cardinal Gregory, that was amazing. So, and I know the work you guys have done with accessibility. And those who weren't on this, the Archdiocese has a sign language interpreter, which was a wonderful, wonderful gift for us, to have during the webinars. So it's always good to see, the work that we can accomplish together.
Amen.
So have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Genevieve, and we'll talk soon. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.